We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Styles McKenzie helping you make those rooms sing. Today's style tip. When it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild, like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Arr, fierce. This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
Welcome to the Beyond Atheism podcast, with me, Nathan Alexander, and my co-host, Todd Tavares. This podcast moves beyond questions of God's existence to ask, what's next in a godless world? Beyond Atheism is produced and distributed by Atheists United Studios.
Today, we are joined by author Paul Clark. Originally from Manchester, England, Paul has traveled extensively and lived all over the world while working as a teacher trainer, published materials writer, an academic manager, and co-owner of a language school. He follows in the tradition of a family tradition of atheism, and he's written a book called The Omega Course, which uses fiction to explore the origins of Christianity and the Bible. Paul, welcome to Beyond Atheism.
Hi, nice to meet you guys. Hi.
Nice to meet you. Yeah, thanks so much.
Well, can you to start, can you tell us about your own background? How did you come to write this book, and what was your inspiration?
I think I wanted to write this book since I was about 17 years old, and I was watching with my little sister Zeffirelli's version of the life of Christ, and it came to the massacre of the innocents, and my sister was very upset by this, and I was very angry because I was sure it never happened. And to see this thing being presented as truth that I was pretty sure never happened. So I think all my life I wanted to write something about this kind of thing. And then round about the turn of the century, I started writing novels. And I thought, hey, this could be a way of doing it, because for me, there was no point me writing a nonfiction book, because people who are a lot better qualified than me can write much better nonfiction books than I can write. You know, if you want to read a nonfiction book about Christ, read Bart Ehrman or something like that. But I could put it in fiction. And my inspiration, in a sense, was Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. I don't know if you've read that book.
No, but I've
I
heard
know
of it, though. Yeah.
Yeah, there were two books that kind of inspired me how to do it. Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance is a kind of autobiographical novel about a philosophy tutor having a nervous breakdown and recovering from his nervous breakdown. And in the course of this, he gives a potted history of philosophy. And Sophie's World is a book for sort of teenagers, young adults, where a young girl has a tutor who keeps sending her philosophical questions and then gradually gives her a history of philosophy. Again, a potted history of philosophy. And I thought, well, why don't I write that with a history of the Bible, of where modern mainstream academic thinkers think the Bible came from, and where mainstream thinkers think Christianity came from, and kind of mix fiction and nonfiction in the same way as these two books did. And so I did it. It took me a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I think I started writing it in 2013, something like that. And eventually I sent it off to an editor who sent it back. And I reread what she said quite recently. And at the time, it felt like she slated it. But she didn't. She made constructive criticisms. And I was quite upset by this. And I left it for several years. I had a day job, which kept me very, very busy. And then the pandemic happened. And I had a lot of time on my hands.
Yeah.
So I'd written some other novels, so I published those. In fact, I'd written one novel and I turned it into a series of 3 novels and published those. And then I thought, okay, I'll have another go at this. So I think I rewrote it twice. And I sent it again to a different editor this time, she had some really good criticisms, but she liked it. And then I went ahead and self-published it as well. Yeah, so that's kind of the history of it. what I've missed out is I've been reading about this for, I don't know, 20 years, 30 years, something like that. It's, if you look at my bookshelves, half the books on my shelves are books about ancient Israel, ancient Rome, Judaism, Christianity, the Bible, and so forth.
Right.
So, there's a lot of background reading for years and years. And what I had to do actually when I was writing was I had to catch up a bit, because a lot of my knowledge was kind of cutting edge 20 years ago.
Right. Yeah.
And when you read some of the newer books, you think, oh, what was cutting edge 20 years ago isn't necessarily going to be cutting edge today.
Well, Paul, okay, this is really fascinating now, because your research doesn't sound any different from what we normally, from people we talk to. Typically, we read, where we talk about nonfiction or history, or we're talking to academics about scholarly work. You've done the same work and put it in a novel form, right? That's fascinating. So a lot of this then comes from research. We should say that in the book, without getting into spoilers, that a lot of what is discussed is, in this historical context, comes from these two sort of parallel narratives that are going on. One is the Alpha course that the main character Ross has been enrolled in, and which is religious, and the more historical Omega course, which is sort of developed out of it. Did you develop these whole cloth, or is the Alpha and Omega courses, do they exist in the real world?
The Alpha course does exist, and it's quite, there's quite a few celebrities who've been on the Alpha course.
Can you explain what it is for us?
It's a rather conservative Christian ABC of Christianity, and it's an introduction to Christianity. It actually started in my hometown in Eastbourne.
Oh.
And I spoke to I gave the book to one Anglican priest who read the book, and we didn't actually speak. We exchanged emails afterwards, and he talked about the Alpha course and said how much he hated the Alpha course, because he was very much a liberal Christian, whereas the Alpha course is very much conservative Christian, and they're not quite fundamentalists, but they do take the Bible literally. And, where the Bible says divorce is wrong and sex before marriage is wrong and homosexuality is wrong, they go for that. It's that kind of conservative. I guess it's evangelical Christian rather than fundamentalist Christian. So what I did is I read up on the Alpha course, and I read the books produced by the Alpha course and the manual for how to run an Alpha course. So that is where my description of the Alpha course came from. And there's been people who've done the Alpha course who've read the book, and they have said to me, it's pretty much similar to what actually happens on the Alpha course. So I was quite pleased that I got that right. I did at one stage think about enrolling on the Alpha course to do some first-hand research. Yeah. And then I thought, can I bear it? I mean, reading their books was sometimes painful enough, but the thought of going there for weeks on end. So I chickened out of that one. But people who've been on it have said it's a fairly good depiction of the Alpha course. So the Omega course is kind of just, it's the opposite.
Which is not, this one is not real.
It's not, I did that. Yeah. There is apparently an Omega course, which is nothing to do with Christianity. I can't remember what it is. And I was a bit disappointed when I discovered that it does exist. I thought, oh, drat. But I think the content of it started, I read Richard Elliott Friedman's book, Who Wrote the Bible, which I don't know if you've read that. And it was cutting edge when I read it. It's not quite so cutting edge now. But he talks about who wrote Genesis, Exodus, etc., the first 5 books of the Bible, and how they're a mishmash of several documents that have been woven together. I just thought, why doesn't everybody know this? People should know this, because when the priests I spoke to, they said, when you go to seminary to learn to be a priest, you learn all this, and then you keep quiet about it.
Right.
It's the esoteric knowledge.
Yeah, it is. I think that's exactly what it is. It's okay for them to know, but they don't want the hoi polloi to know this kind of stuff. here is what they're doing. But I feel if more people knew about this, there wouldn't be fundamentalism, that it wouldn't abolish Christianity. I mean, a lot of this was discovered by Christians, by Christian scholars who were intellectually honest and went where the evidence took them. But these people are not fundamentalists. And, the people who believe every word in the Bible, well, they're just ignorant because they don't know how this book came to be written.
Right. So the Alpha Course, it's training people in biblical literalism and in this like kind of closed off world. Because how is it usually run? This is something that I don't think
it's
would know.
run. You can do it online now, but it's run pretty much as I described in the book. It would be normally evening classes. So it'd be evening classes once a week over an extended period. And it's all very jolly. You go and have dinner together and you sing a couple of hymns, and then there's a lecture, and then you're split up into groups to discuss the lecture. And it's fairly sort of standard way of teaching a course, except it's teaching this particular subject matter. And then the key part of the Alpha course is the weekend away, where you go away for the weekend away, and what they are trying to induce is speaking in tongues. And in fact, in the book, I don't stress it enough, but they really go for speaking in tongues. They put the idea in people's heads, and their aim is to get everybody speaking in tongues, because that will be a conversion experience for a lot of people if they can get them doing that.
Maybe you could tell us a little bit about the plot, like the main plot, how the main character Ross winds up attending the Alpha course. And I mean, I just wanted to say that I found the kind of the nonfiction element was well done, but I really like the kind of the fictional plot as well.
Good.
Yeah, maybe you can tell us.
That's my aim, you see, to suck people in with the fiction.
Yeah, and it worked. Yeah.
Okay, so Ross is 17 years old. We learn to drive in England when we're 17, and he passes his driving test. And Mum and Dad say, don't take your car out of town until we've taken you out of town and given you a bit of practice. But, he's 17-year-old. He's not going to listen to Mum and Dad, and he goes out of town with his friends. And he ends up stuck behind a very slow car and eventually decides to overtake. But if he gets to look in his mirror before he overtakes, somebody crashes into him. And this causes a rotary impact collision. I spent a lot of time watching videos of rotary impact collisions. It is terrifying. If two cars hit each other corner against corner, they can spin round, and it's absolutely terrifying. And what happens is the other driver dies as a result of this rotary impact collision, which is his fault because he didn't look in his mirror. So he goes into absolute crisis mode, and he ends up going into a church and crying his eyes out. And he meets a very sympathetic priest. And the priest tries to get him to pray. And he says, I can't pray because I don't really believe. And so the priest suggests to him to go on the Alpha course. And one of the priests I spoke to after I wrote the book, she said, it's not actually very professional to suggest the Alpha course like that. You shouldn't really jump in that quickly. So I do put a bit at the end of the book where the priest says, I shouldn't have done that. So he and Ross, everyone wants him to have counseling, and he kind of refuses to have counseling. He turns up and it doesn't work. And he says, I knew it wouldn't work anyway. So he goes and joins the Alpha course. And he's after redemption. He thinks he can find redemption through Christianity. And he's desperate to believe, but he's finding it very difficult to believe. And then a woman called B, who's a theology student at university, whose faith is collapsing, her nickname is Omega B, and she gives him an Omega course, which sabotages the Alpha course.
Not intentionally, but yeah.
Yeah, she doesn't mean to do it. He keeps asking her questions, and she keeps answering them. And so he is torn between Alpha and Omega. And I don't want to give any spoilers about what happens.
Points for the Alpha and Omega. That's
yeah.
The names work
Yeah.
brilliantly.
Yeah. How did you mentioned like all the research you did for the Alpha course and even for the about the traffic accidents. I mean, I also was impressed by like the legal kind of like the legal process that goes on. Because I mean, another point is that Ross, in addition to feeling the guilt, also has this like legal case hanging over his head. And yeah, and then like yeah, maybe talk about all the research you did for that
Yeah,
and so on. Yeah.
there's a bit of experience goes into that because I used to be the owner of a language school and the principal of a language school. And this was a language school in the UK where people came over to the UK to learn English. And in that role, I had quite a lot of involvement with the police because we would have students arrested for shoplifting, or we would have students who were attacked by the local yobs, or we would have members of staff who got into trouble as well. So I spent quite a lot of time dealing with the police and helping people make statements with the police and so forth. And so and also as a language teacher, I've taken students to the magistrate's court to see what goes on. And so I've witnessed cases in the magistrate court as well. So that was a big help. And then I did research. I bought the police manual. You can buy a manual that the police have, and I got the 2017 police manual because the book is set in 2018, and sort of read about procedures for dealing with under 18s. And for various reasons, I decided to make him under 18 because he would get in a lot less trouble. Basically, if he was under 18. If he was over 18, the whole process would take a lot longer, and he would get in a lot more trouble. And I thought, let's make him under 18 and keep him young enough to get out of trouble in to a certain extent. So, it was a combination of experience and research that led to that. Yeah. But quite a lot of research.
Well, yeah, hit us with some of that research. We want to know about this. I do have a fascination with the writing of the Bible, who wrote which book, where it came from, the comparisons of the synoptic texts, which all look the same, and it seems like they're all copy parts of Luke and built upon, whereas John is completely different. When going through it, what were for you in your research, what were the biggest takeaways and the most important or powerful pieces that you discovered and would like to pass on?
I think one of the biggest takeaways was when I got to writing the book and rewriting it, and my research is a bit out of date, I went for more cutting edge research. And one is about how the Jews became monotheistic. And it's a lot later than we think. One of the first books that got me onto this was, her name is very difficult, Francesca Stravonopoulou. Do you know Francesca Stravonopoulou? She wrote a wonderful book called God and Anatomy. And what she says in this book is that when the Old Testament says the hand of God, the mouth of God, the breath of God, the eyes of God, etc., it's not speaking metaphorically. It means the hand of God, the mouth of God, the breath of God, etc., because Yahweh, the ancient Israelite God, was a pagan god. He wasn't capital G God. He was a small g pagan god, worshipped as such by the ancient Israelites. And she says that the ancient Israelites were always polytheistic. One of her big sources was a book called The Invention of God by Thomas Romer, which when I came to buy it, it's an academic book. And you know how much academic books cost? Yeah, they cost a lot of money.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I eventually found one on eBay and got that. And Romer himself, he's a Jesuit priest. This is not an atheist digging this stuff up. He's a Jesuit priest, but he's intellectually honest and he goes where the evidence takes him. And what he says, I think, is pretty much accepted by a lot of academics these days, that Yahweh was a pagan god who entered Israelite life round about 1000 BCE, something like that. He was a god of storms and war, and he was associated with the legend of an exodus from Egypt. So perhaps some people who had left Egypt at some time had adopted him as one of their gods and emigrated into the kingdom of Israel and perhaps Judah as well. And he became a royal god or a national god, which could have happened under one of the early kings like David or Solomon or someone like that. And then when the Israelites and the Judahites were pretty much shattered by the Assyrians and the Babylonians, and the Judahites went into Israel to exile in Babylon, there was one faction within these countries that said, we have a covenant with Yahweh and we should only worship him. And these people accepted that there were other gods, but they said, we're not allowed to worship them. We only have to worship Yahweh. And as a general rule, the Israelites and the Judahites ignored this. There were one or two kings who had, went along with this, but generally speaking, they ignored this. And these people said, when Israel and Judah were destroyed, it was arranged by Yahweh because Yahweh was angry with them because they kept worshiping other gods. And this was a step to a great theological revolution, which was the monotheistic revolution. And this happened during and after the exile in Babylon, which is much, much later than people have traditionally believed. And by this time, most of the Old Testament had been written. So the Old Testament was written by pagans, essentially, who worshipped Yahweh, didn't worship other gods, but believed that there were other gods. And there's all kinds of places where this is evident in the Bible. And when you have, it's something I got from Yuval Noah Harari's book, Sapiens. I first came across the idea. He says, we've been conditioned to believe that monotheism is an advance on polytheism, but it's not. Polytheism is intellectually coherent because in polytheism, the gods are not very nice, basically. And if you want to know why life is horrible, it's because the gods are horrible. Yeah. And they want you to worship them in the right way. And if you don't, they'll punish you and smite you. And even if you do, they might not. And the other thing in polytheism, the gods are not all powerful. There's something which is more powerful than the gods. So in Greek mythology, it's the fates. Yeah, the fates are more powerful than the gods. And there's no point worshipping the fates because they don't care. Yeah, they're completely indifferent. They just do what they do. In Hinduism, there's spirit, which is often seen as more powerful than the gods. And again, there's no point worshipping spirit. It doesn't care. It's indifferent. So in polytheistic religions, the problem of evil is not really a big problem. Yeah, the gods aren't very nice, and there's something more powerful than them, which doesn't care. It's a bit like the atheistic view that the universe is basically indifferent to us. They've got that in common. Whereas in monotheism, you've got this all-knowing, all-loving, and all-powerful perfect being who allows terrible things to happen. Well, you've got a contradiction there. And monotheists have been wrestling with that contradiction ever since monotheism came along. And in the Bible, you get very different ways of dealing with that. I mean, Ecclesiastes, I think, is wonderful. It's a wonderful book, which is saying, we can't understand why God allows terrible things to happen. Just shut up and have a good time when you can. It's almost like a Stoic or existentialist point of view that comes across there. And there are other parts of the Bible that say God is just. And of course, one way God can be just is they can invent an afterlife. That, this life might be pretty grim, but you worship God in the right way, you'll go to heaven. And the wrong way, you'll go to hell, and then justice will be preserved. Whereas the author of Ecclesiastes didn't believe this at all. He didn't think there was an afterlife. An afterlife came into Judaism much later. So that was a big thing that I hadn't known before.
Yeah. Wait, but Paul, were you raised with this sort of religious education or religious background at all?
No. My parents were both atheists.
But how did you pick this stuff up to learn to critique?
Yeah.
That's like
my my mum was she was a very moderate person, but she was very anti-Catholic. She'd been brought up as a Catholic, and she'd gone to Catholic schools and been educated by nuns
That
who
happens.
she said
Yeah.
were horrible.
Yeah.
And she didn't have a good word to say for them, but, she was quite a moderate lady and wouldn't say bad things about religion. My dad had a very Christian mum, and his dad was a free thinker who probably was religious in some sense. My dad loved to talk about religion, and he would say, I can't understand how intelligent people believe this rubbish. And I grew up with a fascination for religion, and I still have my dad's question. I can understand people believing in God of some kind, some kind of deistic God. I can get that. And I can get people believing in the Christian tradition. There are very good things about the Christian tradition, certain parts of it. There are other parts which are not very good, but there are very good bits of it. But I can't get people who take the Bible literally. And it fascinates me that people can do this.
But were your parents responsible for teaching you about religion and what
we
the
had to
stories
learn
of the Bible?
Britain is different from America because we have religious education at school. And religious education has changed, but when I was at school, they were pushing Christianity at us. So we learned the basic Bible stories at school. And I would be the subversive little kid who would be saying, "No, it's all rubbish." And my RE teacher, religious education teacher, would try and persuade me. And, he would say things like, well, if Jesus wasn't the Messiah, he must have been a lunatic.
Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I would go, well, he was a lunatic.
Right.
He would threaten me with detention
Yeah.
Yeah.
if I said that again. But, I think America's church and state are, at the moment anyway,
Yeah.
separate.
Don't
Yeah.
remind
But
me.
in Britain, they're not in the same way. And my primary school was a Methodist primary school. So it was pushed at us. So we had to deal with it willy-nilly.
Yeah, but I think in the book, I think you're pretty fair to the religious characters. I mean, even the people on the Alpha course, they're not, like monsters. You can see there's, they have good intentions and so on, even if, and I think that's another strength of the book that, it's you do capture the kind of the complexity, even though obviously you ultimately support the atheist kind of position, but I don't think it's beating up Christians or something like that.
Yeah, and I've had 5-star reviews from Christian reviewers, and I have a friend who's a very strong Christian. I put adverts on Facebook. This is an atheist novel, and she shares it because she liked the book from that point of view. The leader of the Alpha course, I think he's a bit of a prig, but he's a nice guy. There's no malice in him.
No.
Whatsoever.
And then some of the volunteers on the course and so on. Yeah.
And I've got Jess's dad. Sorry, I've renamed her. I'll tell you about why I renamed her in a moment. B's dad, who's a very liberal Christian, he kind of represents a friend of mine. And some of the things he says is what the friend has said to me. So yeah. I renamed all the characters. Probably I'd done my first complete rewrite and I was halfway through my second rewrite, and I was talking to someone and she said, "Oh, so it's a bit like Crime and Punishment then." And I thought, oh, is it? Okay. So I hadn't read Crime and Punishment at this point. So I read Crime and Punishment and I saw the parallels, the parallels were there. And I thought, okay, let's go for it and let's accentuate the parallels. So the hero had to be named Ross Collins, which is Raskolnikov. Okay, that's as near as I could get. And his friend is Rajumkin. Okay, and the only name I could think that was near to that was Raj, so he became Indian. And B, how was I going to do this? And eventually I came up that she's named after John Knox, isn't she? Yeah, so, and all sorts of characters were renamed. Sophie, who becomes the love interest in the story, is named after Sophia in Crime and Punishment, who is a prostitute. So Sophie had to have a bit of a past, and that's how she acquired her past. And Sid was a new character who was introduced, and he's based on a character in Crime and Punishment.
Well, tell us more about that. What thematically, what do you see as the similarities between the two?
The similarity with Crime and Punishment, Raskolnikov commits a murder. He intends to murder one woman, and he accidentally murders two women, and he just goes to pieces as a result of committing this murder. And the similarity is that in my book, Ross kills a woman in an accident and goes to pieces. The difference is, of course, in Crime and Punishment, that Raskolnikov eventually sort of seems to find redemption through Christianity. Whereas in my book, it's a bit more complex than that.
Yeah. And yeah, that was one thing I was going to ask about is, like ideas about redemption and forgiveness and so on are really kind of linked with Christianity, at least, in the West. And I wonder and I mean, it's something like Ross kind of struggles with in the novel. Like, he feels horrible, but it's like, what do you do to make up? Like, there's nothing you can do to kind of make up for that, killing someone even unintentionally. Like, what punishment would you need to endure to kind of atone for that? I'm not sure what my question is, but aside from like, maybe it makes sense more. And like,
I think it is one of the strengths of Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the strengths of Christianity that in Christianity, no one is irredeemable. And you do get the people who become Christians, he was a drug addict, she was a prostitute, he was a murderer, whatever, and they found God and they found redemption. I'm a bit critical of that because, what does it mean to find redemption? How do you redeem yourself if you've done something terrible? The victim's family might have a different attitude to your redemption than you have. So I did a lot of work. My daughter is a trained counselor, so I leaned on her quite a lot. And when it came to the counseling, she helped me rewrite quite a few of my counseling sessions. She would say, no, a counselor wouldn't say that. You got to change it, and so forth. So yeah, I found research where I could.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I was wondering about that because I mean, some of the therapy sessions Ross goes into, I think, it makes a lot of sense what the counselor says to him. Yeah.
I mean, I did a lot of research, and research is quite easy these days. You Google it.
Yeah.
And you can find it, and you just got to spend the hours reading what you Google.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
When I wrote my first novel, one of the characters was shot, and I had to go to the local library to find out what happened when you get shot. But if I did it now, I'd just Google it and ask ChatGPT, what happens when you get shot?
The YouTube videos would be pretty graphic, though.
Oh, I'm a much more careful driver.
Really?
The standard speed limit here is 30, and most people do 32. 33. Most people do. And on the motorway, it's 70, and most people do 75. And after watching these videos, I do 30 and I do 70 because they were terrifying. They were absolutely terrifying. You'd see cars getting hit and just flying across the road. So yeah, it had an effect on me.
Wow. Yeah, that's an Omega course. But Paul, I heard you somewhere in there, you described it as an atheist novel. And I'm curious what you mean by that, because it's, on the one hand, this is a book that is it's filled with religion, right? Not just the ideas and beliefs, but practices, and getting into just basically a course. It describes the course on Introduction to Christianity. I mean, do you see this as an atheist atheistic work of art?
My intention when I first sat down to write it was to promote atheism. That was my intention. Then when you write a novel where people have got different ideas, one of the rules of writing a novel is you give the bad guys the best arguments. You don't make the bad guys idiots.
Yeah. Not straw men.
Not straw men. So what is given in the Alpha Course is pretty much what you get in the Alpha Course. I read the Alpha Course manuals and I read the books that they've written. And even for some of the asides, I would go and get one of their books and see what they said about this. Like at one stage, someone says, what about Muslims? Do they go to heaven? So I had to buy a little pamphlet written by Nicky Gumbel, who runs the Alpha Course, and find out what he thinks about whether Muslims go to heaven. And spoiler alert, no, they don't. He insists that the only way to heaven is through Jesus Christ. So, to do this, I had to let the Christians speak for themselves, both the conservative Christians on the Alpha Course, and then I wanted the liberal Christian voice as well, because, for me, given the choice between an illiberal atheist and a liberal Christian, I'd probably take the liberal Christian, actually. Because they're probably a nicer person. And a world that they dominate will be a nicer place than a world dominated by illiberal atheists. So I was very happy to express their point of view. And I sent the book to Anglican priests and they fed back. And they said, well, why don't you say this? Why don't you say that? You should be saying this. So I put it in. And then I've got different atheist arguments because there are atheists who are, if you like, quite pro-Christianity. And there are atheists who are very anti-Christianity. So I tried to have both of these points of view in the book without ever really saying where I am. And so my intention is to, I guess, help people to know. I mean, what you're writing a book, one intention is to entertain. But the other thing I wanted to do was to help people know more about Christianity. And I think if people do know more about Christianity, it won't necessarily make them atheists, but they won't be fundamentalists or evangelicals in the same way.
I mean, I guess another thing to add is like the some of the research you mentioned, about the kind of authorship of the Old Testament or something. It's not like it's fringe arguments or anything. Like it's pretty, like you say, like this is all mainstream stuff. And it's not, I don't think it's controversial, or anything like that. Like I think probably everyone mostly agrees to it, I imagine. Another thing I wanted to ask about is, well, this question of the historical Jesus. And I think like sometimes among atheists, there's an argument sometimes about, that Jesus maybe wasn't a real person or was a myth or something like that. And maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it is an argument among atheists. And for me, it saddens me that it's such a prominent argument among atheists. And I think some atheists have the idea, I mean, the fundamentalist Christian will tell you everything in the Bible is true, literally true. It doesn't contradict itself, blah, blah, blah. And you get some atheists who I think go completely the opposite way and say the Bible is worthless. Nothing in the Bible is true. You can't learn anything from the Bible. And that's not how historians operate. A historian approaching the Bible as a historian will say, okay, here we've got this amazing historical document, which is an anthology of religious texts written over a period of about 1,000 years, something like that. And let's read these texts and see what we can learn about the author. What was the author of this text trying to say? Why were they trying to say it? Who were they? And that's how historians read any historical document. And the Bible is a collection of historical documents. And from it, you can glean truth. Now, one of the big questions about whether Jesus existed or not, one of the big arguments for the reason why he probably did exist, in fact, he almost certainly did exist, is the criterion of embarrassment. And this is a criterion that came quite late. I think it was in the 1970s, this argument came quite late. And it was an argument that if the New Testament contains something which is embarrassing for the early church, then that's a sign that it's probably fairly authentic, because why would they put it in if it wasn't true? And there's a wonderful blog called History for Atheists. Have you ever been on History for Atheists? Yeah, wonderful blog. And he mentions three big embarrassments for Christianity, for the early church. One of them is that Jesus came from Nazareth. And he wasn't supposed to come from Nazareth. The church had latched onto a prophecy in Micah, which actually has nothing to do with Messiahs, but the church had latched onto this prophecy that the Messiah would emerge from Bethlehem. And, Matthew and Luke invent two completely different stories about why he was born in Bethlehem rather than Nazareth. But why did they mention Nazareth at all? And the only reason why the early church would mention a little village in the back end of beyond in Galilee is because everyone knew that's where Jesus came from. Yeah, they wouldn't have made it up. The second big embarrassment is the baptism of Jesus by John the Baptist, because it is inherent in the ceremony of baptism that the person baptizing is superior to the person being baptized. So if John baptized Jesus, that means at that moment, John the Baptist was superior to Jesus. And this is a big embarrassment for the church. It's an even bigger embarrassment because in the first century, the followers of John the Baptist were still around as a rival sect to the Jesus sect. And, it's a big embarrassment that Jesus was probably a follower of John the Baptist at one stage. And according to the Synoptic Bibles, when John was arrested is when Jesus started his mission. But why would they include this baptism if it wasn't a historical event? And most historians believe, we can be pretty sure, that it was a historical event, that John the Baptist baptized Jesus. And then the third one is crucifixion, that we have lost sight of the fact that at the time, crucifixion was the most humiliating punishment that anyone could ever have. Roman citizens could not be crucified. You couldn't crucify a member of the nobility. The only people you could crucify were slaves, pirates, and rebels. They were the only three kind of people who could be crucified. The crucified victim wouldn't have a nice loincloth to cover their modesty. They would be crucified naked. And it was for maximum humiliation. Typically, the crucified victim would be left on the cross to rot. And crows would come and peck their eyes out. And as bits of them fell off, the dogs would come along and eat them, etc. And they were there as a warning. Now, there's a big debate in academic circles about whether this is what happened in Palestine. Because in Deuteronomy, it says, anyone hung on a tree will be cursed by God. And so, especially if you're hung on a tree overnight after you're dead, you'll be cursed by God. And so the Jewish authorities would not have liked crucified victims being stuck on a cross overnight after they'd died. So there's a big debate in academic circles. Did the Romans change normal practice because of Jewish sensitivities? And is it possible that Jesus was in fact brought down from the cross as soon as he was dead? And the answer to that is we don't know. If you read the argument, it goes round and round and round in circles. But crucifixion was a humiliating punishment. It's the lowest of the low get crucified. Nobody else gets crucified. Why would Christians invent a death like that for Jesus? They wouldn't. The only reason a death like that can be there is because everybody knew that's what happened. He was crucified. So those three events, that Jesus was from Nazareth, that he was baptized, and that he was crucified, most historians accept those as real historical events. Everything else is up for grabs. But those three things we're pretty sure happened. Some books will give a longer list of what we can be sure of.
And you've spent a lot of time in this reading Christian literature, and it's never cracked your atheist core. It's never induced you to have a thought about this.
No, I mean when I read, I mean a lot of it is I'm reading history. I mean, you know, I read the Bible, and I read what Christians write about the Bible, but a lot of it I'm reading academic history, what academic historians are saying. Many of whom are Christians, but they're wearing their academic historian hat, not their Christian hat. And no, it doesn't crack my atheism at all.
It's amazing. That makes me, I don't know, feel a little more fearless in the face of Christian proselytizing, right? Like it's not, if it can't get Paul, it's not going to get me. Right?
Yeah.
He's been
I
in
mean,
the trenches.
yeah.
He's seen it all.
I mean, I'm sure it's a more common, like, you know, where well, I think like in the novel, like the character of B, where, you know, she studies theology more and more, and like it's that actual process of like studying the Bible more and so on that leads you into atheism, or at least, you know, some kind of disbelief.
And apparently this is a common thing, that people go to study theology at university because they're deeply Christian and they want to be a better Christian and a more knowing Christian, and they go to university and they're hit over the head by this stuff. And it's not uncommon for people's faith to be very, very tested by this. I've spoken to other people. There was a podcast, I'm trying to remember the name of it, the Unsure podcast. They interviewed a woman who had exactly this experience, that she was deeply Christian. She went to study theology and she lost her faith at university while studying theology. And I was sitting listening to it and thinking, this is B. You know, I'm listening to an interview with B here. Yeah, very, very much. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of priests who find it very challenging.
Yeah. Yeah. There are estimates about like the number of atheist priests who don't believe and are just kind of trapped, and it's shockingly high, runs from like 30 to 50%, the estimates. But related to that, one of the things we've noticed as atheists and talking to other atheists and being members of atheist groups and organizations was that like atheists take religion very seriously. It's not something that you take lightly. It's a serious imposition on your life. It's meant to be difficult and challenging, and you have to engage in it seriously to find out what it really means. If it's and a lot of we've also found the flip side is a lot of religious people don't take it very seriously, and it's just a list of prescriptions or identities that they need to pretend to conform to. With that in mind, I think we should move on to the speed round. That sound good, Nathan? The lightning round. All right. So, Paul, these are yes or no questions, but you can answer them any way you like. And yeah, and it's just rapid fire. You can answer as much or as little as you like. Nathan, is there anything else that I'm forgetting about? Can a true atheist?
Yeah, it's about questions that, can a true atheist do such and such? It's mostly just, well, tongue in cheek. But it's also a jumping off point for more deeper discussion. So the first question always is, can a true atheist believe in God?
I would say no. If atheist means you don't believe in God.
See, you got a hand of it. Yeah, you understand this game right away. This is pretty easy. Okay, Paul. Can a true atheist attend a church?
Yeah, why not? I mean, in fact, there was a survey done of British Anglicans, what they believe, and like 30% don't believe in heaven and hell, but they still go to church. And there are atheist priests in the Church of England, and they believe that religion is important to bring people together and to get the best out of people, and that God doesn't exist out there, but he's a metaphor for our best aspects. So personally, I'd rather have teeth pulled, but if an atheist wants to go to church,
Yeah. Okay. Can a true atheist celebrate the Bible as literature?
Yeah, I don't see why not. Yeah, I mentioned it before. I love Ecclesiastes. I think Ecclesiastes is right up there with the Greeks and the Stoics and people like that. I hate Revelation. You know, I mean, there was a big debate about whether that book should be included in the Bible at all. And unfortunately, they included it. I don't think anything has done more harm than that particular book in the Bible. But yeah, why not him? I think Richard Dawkins, he wants a copy of the King James Bible in every school in England. Yeah,
right.
some of it is great literature,
Yeah,
no doubt
yeah.
about it.
When did you first read the Bible?
I probably, when I started researching, so it'll be back in the 1980s, I started reading it. And then I never quite read it cover to cover, but I read it cover to cover about 3 or 4 years ago.
Really? Wow. How long
Yeah.
did that take?
Oh, ages.
Yeah.
Ages. And sometimes I was thinking, why am I doing this to myself? Because a lot of it I'd read anyway.
Yeah.
Sort of reading it bit by bit and jumping about in the Bible. Some of it I loved and some of it I hated. And a lot of it I didn't understand. Like Jonah. I read after reading the Bible cover to cover, I didn't like Jonah. I didn't understand it. I thought Jonah was a complete prat. And then years later, I read the Yale University Open course in Old Testament studies. And the woman writing the course said it was one of her favorite books. And she said, Jonah is satire. And then I thought, oh, that's why Jonah is such a prat. Satire. It's an attack on intolerance.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
And so I should have gone back and reread Jonah.
Yeah.
But I couldn't be bothered.
Yeah.
Yeah. They should make that a little clearer as well.
They should.
That would-
Yeah.
Satire warning.
Right, yeah. Use a special font
Yeah,
or
right. Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
Okay, Paul. Can a true atheist celebrate religious holidays?
Yeah. Yeah. We can take them over.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I in Britain, I think America is different. I in Britain live in a post-Christian society. Yeah, America,
What does that mean, Paul, when you say it's post-Christian?
most people are no longer Christians
Wow.
in the UK. It doesn't mean they don't believe in God or believe in something or some kind of spirituality. But I would say 50% of British people are not Christians. But Christianity saturates our culture. And Christmas, yay, great. Easter, excuse for chocolate eggs.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That part I get. Easter, even the name
Right.
is pagan,
Yeah,
Yeah.
the name
Yeah.
is pagan, isn't it?
My neighborhood gets a lot of Keep the Christ in Christmas, and I think this year I'm putting up the Keep the Estra in Easter, named after the pagan god of springtime, because we're due. We got to take that one back
Yeah.
completely.
Yeah, like we know what it's like to, like have these more kind of pagan holidays. We know what it's like to celebrate them with not at all, kind of believing in pagan sort of stuff.
My kids at their school, they took part in nativity plays. And I went along and watched and took a photo. You were allowed to take photos in those days and thought, oh, isn't she sweet? And, it's part of our culture. So I'm quite happy with that.
Can a true atheist believe in karma?
Yeah, because a lot of Buddhists are atheists, aren't they? And they believe in karma. For me, atheism has quite a narrow meaning. It means you don't believe in God. And beyond that, I mean, the one thing all atheists agree about is we don't believe in God.
Yes.
And we probably don't agree about anything else.
Right.
So, yeah, a Buddhist atheist will believe in karma.
All atheists are right about exactly one thing. After that, all bets are off. Okay. Can a true atheist think that Jesus had some good ideas?
Yeah. Yeah, why not? I mean, I don't think he really had many, personally, because I think his basic message was the world is about to end. Get ready for the end of the world. And spoiler alert, the world didn't end. And, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Well, sorry, they won't.
Yeah.
They never do. They need to join a union and stand up.
Right.
Yeah.
And then they might get a bit more of their fair share. So I don't think he was a great teacher, but the Sermon on the Mount is lovely, isn't it? It's lovely. I think Luke's version is probably better, because Matthew and Mark say, blessed are the poor in spirit, whereas Luke says, blessed are the poor. And I think that's probably had a better influence on the world than the other two. But yeah. Why not?
There's a funny bit by Louis C.K., the comedian, where I don't know, Todd and Paul, if you've seen it, where he reads this Bible story where Jesus curses a fig tree. That's basically like the fig tree is not in season, and Jesus is really mad at this fig tree for not being in season, and so he decides to curse the entire tree. And it's like there's just kind of random stuff like this in the Bible too, Anyway, the last.
I'm all for radical love.
Right,
I'm against cursing fig trees. Yeah, he was dead wrong about that.
And the last one, can a true atheist believe in redemption?
Well, this is a theme of my book, isn't it? That I think otherwise you're just saying someone who's made a big mistake or done something very wrong, lock them up and throw away the key. I think redemption isn't a thing, it's a process. And if we've all done little bad things, touch wood, I haven't yet done any really, really, really bad things. But forgiving yourself is a process. And you should never 100% forgive yourself for the mistakes you've made, but you should, forgive yourself enough to get on with life. I think redemption is possible. I think there are some people who are probably irredeemable. You've just elected one of them to be president. I think psychopaths are irredeemable.
Yeah.
But if you've got a conscience, redemption is a possibility.
Well, that's a heck of a place to leave it, Paul. Thank you so much for coming on. This has been incredibly enlightening and way deeper than we expected.
Tell us more about how to get the book.
Yeah. Okay. So the book is available on Amazon and various other platforms. You can probably get it in a bookshop. If you'd have to order it, but you could probably get it in a bookshop. It's called The Omega Course. And it's a really good book. I do recommend it.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah.
So do we, Paul. Yes. Fantastic.
Great.
We'll have a link below. Check it out. And thanks again, Paul.
Okay, thank you. It's been fun. Enjoyed meeting you.
Okay, that was Paul Clark. Nice chatting with him.
Amazing.
What did you take away from it?
He knows his stuff, huh? A lot of research went into that. And I think it came up in the discussion that it's a very different way to read this stuff. We're used to doing academic stuff and heavily citation, lots of notes, and getting into primary sources. This is a totally different read. Did you do you prefer that way? Do you get more out of it when you find it in fiction?
Not necessarily, but I did really appreciate the style of the book and the way the information's presented. It's like it's presented in digestible chunks. Like I don't think most people are going to go out and read some account of like how the Old Testament was written. But I think they may, may read a book like this where you learn kind of along with the characters, and like you have questions that the characters themselves might have, and like it's explained in a way that these characters, they're like young adults. Like not that the information is presented like dumbed down or anything like that, but it's presented in a kind of digestible way, and there's the plot that kind of surrounds everything, so it's not a whole bunch of like heavy material. Like there's kind of the plot that surrounds it, so it was
not a
good way.
didactic reading.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Reading to learn. There's some enjoyment and levity.
That's right. Yeah.
I get it. I can see that.
Yeah.
I like the other stuff. The getting into the true authorship and how it was formed and how it changed over time. I'm a sucker for that stuff. And I mean, the other thing is in this is I think in the book, it's a Cambridge theology student. So it is kind of who's running the Omega course and giving the history of the Bible and the history of the Bible's authorship and where stuff comes from. So it is kind of like a lecture in a way, just sort of smuggled in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good
Yeah.
mix, good balance.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's a good way to present material.
Do you think we should have more like overtly atheistic culture like this? Paul thinks it's atheistic. I think I don't know, it's not secular. It's just
Yeah. I think what makes it successful though is like it doesn't beat you over the head. Like, we were saying that, he gives a fair hearing to Christians, I would say. So it's not like, all the atheists make perfect arguments, all the Christians are idiots, and like the author kind of beats you over the head with what they believe. Like it's kind of a
yeah,
nuanced like exploration, and some of the characters are more, like he says, like more liberal Christians who maybe find value in some of the stories, even if they don't believe it's literally true, and so on. So I think that's what makes, yeah, like some novels successful versus others where it's clear like the author just wants you to believe a certain thing and that's it. Whereas this is a more kind of nuanced portrayal, I
yeah,
would say. Yeah.
yeah, and definitely like full marks to him for like one. I had never heard of the Alpha course. I had no idea what it was, and to like distill it and work it into literature this way, work it into a novel, and a way to like learn about that without having to delve into the more, you would normally hear that about that from a religious person, someone who had been through the course and wanted you to do the course, and to be able to have some critical distance, but someone who treats it fairly is really important. That's really good to see. That's good to learn. Yeah, I
Yeah.
like that part. It's a pretty cool
Yeah.
book.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And it would appeal, I think, to people who are just interested in, learning about religion in any way. I mean, or atheists. I mean, I think atheists will like
Yeah,
it too.
yes.
But yeah, which is probably our primary audience.
Yeah,
But yeah, yeah. So yeah.
it's neat.
Um,
Yeah, we don't have much like, film or television or literature to
no.
really latch onto. Not the way like he was saying, like Dostoevsky, it's very Christianist, right? If you're gonna read
Yeah, that's
The
true. Yeah,
Idiot
I
or
mean,
the
there's so much, and also I think like with Christianity, there's a lot of stories which are not explicitly Christian, but kind of use like Christian kind of mythology in a way, I guess, or archetype or whatever of like kind of a savior kind of character and like redemption, and that's sort of like a Jesus kind of figure is kind of smuggled in there like an allegory or whatever. So yeah, I think always the challenge with these novels is, again, like you don't want to have this kind of straightforward didactic novel. You want it to be enjoyable to read and not just kind of proselytize or whatever.
yeah.
So
Yeah. Oh, and don't be fooled. He does have copious notes. He has
yeah,
a
that's
long
right.
bibliography. He has a lot
Yeah.
of reading, a lot of suggested
Hmm.
reading.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
even as a sort of entrepot for learning about this discussion and the dilemmas it caused and the history of authorship and the debate, what the current field of debate looks like. Yeah, it's a great place to start. It's fascinating, good stuff to get into.
Yeah. So people should check it out. And
Yeah,
we'll post the
absolutely.
links below. Yeah.
Fantastic. Give it a click. Send him some money. Make it
Yeah.
happen. Anything else, Nathan? What have you got going on?
Not much. I'm active on Blue Sky. So
Oh, that's
follow me
fantastic.
there.
How do
Yeah.
people find you on Blue Sky now?
Just Google my name, or not Google it, but search it in for Blue Sky. I
That's
realize,
so
and I'll put a link below, which I realize is not a good way to promote
yeah,
it, but yeah.
that's
Yeah.
great. So yeah, love hearing from you guys. Thoughts on episodes, anything you'd like to hear, hit up. I'm going to assume it's Nath G. Alexander at Blue Sky or Bisky.
It's pretty close. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Pretty close. God,
Yeah.
it's
Um,
something out on a
yeah.
website
Yeah. I
somewhere.
mean, yeah. Yeah.
There's a link below. Look
Yeah,
down.
yeah,
You can
yeah,
find it. It's around.
yeah.
Otherwise, nothing else going on. I certainly don't have anything going on. I am more of a hermit than ever. We currently have a lot of snow in New
Mhm.
Jersey, which has been great. I'm getting really fit
Yeah,
from shoveling
yeah, yeah.
constantly. That's it, though. Who can we give
Oh,
thanks to?
we need to thank Atheist United,
Absolutely.
who hosts our show, and the
Especially since, keep in
audience.
mind, they are in Atheists United is out of Los Angeles. Los Angeles has had a rough go of things lately. They do not live in isolation. They're part of a larger community there. They have food distribution. They have outreach programs. So you're not just giving to an atheist organization. You're giving to people who are currently in serious need. So be sure to check out their website. It's also linked below. And check them out if you're in the area in California. You can join. Check them out. And Red Japan is always killing it with the music. Love hearing that. And from me, that's all I've got. Anything else, Nathan?
That's all.
All right.
So we'll see
You
everyone
got it.
next time.
You got it. Bye-bye.